So today we're talking about Rotary and immigration. And I will just start out by saying the general concept. Okay, first of all, I'm David Serby. I'm the incoming president of Rotary this year, and I'm the Rotary Representative to the Inter-American Development Bank. I'm actually heading to Melbourne. We'll talk about that in a second, presenting this PowerPoint here. We're very pleased to have two special guests here today. Greg Chen, who will introduce himself and just say a little bit about yourself, and then Rich Carson, a great friend of the club, helped start the club. Thank you, Rich, for being here. What I wanted to do is, first of all, say this is a discussion. We're going to leave time, and we really hope you have questions at the end. We'd like to make this a discussion. The big theme of this is Rotary is a problem solver. Rotary is increasingly becoming an agent. I've seen this in in conferences. Rotary is increasingly using its skills and its zen and its focus on just basic common sense and decency to solve problems. Increasingly, this is not just in international affairs or complex issues overseas, it's right here at home. And one of the most important things I'm hoping that people will realize is that there is no theme out there more important than immigration that needs the application of the four-way test. And when everything we think, say, or do, real quickly, is it the truth? You know, when you're hearing stuff on immigration, you're hearing a lot of people say, America's a fascist country, the way they're treating these people coming toward. And then on the other hand, you hear people say, we have open borders, people are being invited in here, which, by the way, encourages the smugglers. Did you ever think about that? The people who are saying, who are complaining about us having open borders, they are literally quoted by smugglers. That falsehood is quoted by smugglers to attract people illegally to our country. Think about that. So is it the truth? Neither one of those statements are true. We're not a fascist state. We don't have open borders. Is it fair to all concerned? What do we think about here? We think about basic principles. We got to be fair. We got to be good. We got to do the right thing. We also have to take care of our own citizens primarily, right? That's a basic premise. The third principle, will it build goodwill and better friendships? That's basically how we talk to people. We don't all agree on immigration. Can we at least talk to people in a decent way? Can you be open-minded? Can you listen before you make a judgment? And can you maybe learn from somebody who has a different perspective? And finally, is it beneficial to all concerned? That's often the overlooked last part of the four-way test because it's kind of seen as a repetition of, is it fair, right? Fair and beneficial. No, that's a chance at the last second when you're doing what you're doing. It's the final assessment. All right, is there a way to take what I'm doing and maybe add something to it so that somebody who is either not supporting me or actually opposing me on this might change their position because of the beneficial part. So it's a creative way to add positive value. That's why I think the four-way test is so brilliant for addressing complex issues like immigration. I'll pass it over to Greg, who's going to give us a kind of a 30,000-foot overview. First, he's going to introduce himself, and then he's going to give us the 30,000-foot overview of what the heck is happening in immigration right now. All right.
Thank you, David, for that lovely introduction, for welcoming me to your club here this morning. And so I'm Greg Chen. I work professionally with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and I direct the government relations for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is about 17,000 member voluntary private bar association nationwide of people who are representing businesses and families, people who are seeking humanitarian protection in the immigration field, both globally and also primarily in the United States. I'm really thrilled to be here. I didn't realize how many little connections that I would make just talking to you in the group. I met Ginny, who literally was a neighbor 30 years ago in occupying the house right next to ours. We live right in Washington, D.C. in the American University Park area. And I talked with Alan, our passionate biker here, and I happen to be a fellow cyclist. I'd much rather be wearing my spandex today than this suit, I guarantee you. But I didn't know that was allowed. I would have done that otherwise. It's not. So I've committed really the past 30 years of almost all of my professional life working with communities in the United States, welcoming refugees, immigrants into the country. We came to Washington 20 years ago. When I say we, that was my wife and I initially, thinking that we would leave relatively quickly and end up working with United Nations for High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, or another international organization on refugee protection issues, because that was both of our backgrounds, representing children and families that were fleeing typically persecution or had some other driving fear that would force them to leave their country. And I was representing children at the time. That's what brought us here. And then 2 children popped along. I'm going to elementary school. We love our neighbor here in Washington, and very hard to think of another place to live. So thank you for welcoming me here. David started off by saying at the beginning that Rotary Club is about problem solving. And I think that is probably the missing element of the equation of so much of what is happening right now in what you see in the news, perhaps, maybe what you see in Washington, in the field of immigration itself. And I think the challenge of talking about immigration really comes down to the fact that it has become something that is defined in many ways more by perception and politics than perhaps by what, as David also said, decent human beings might think about the issue when you sit down and actually have a cup of coffee or breakfast at a Rotary Club. And so my goal here is really to kind of share a little bit of the nature of my work and what we see about happening in the issues, not to try to solve every issue or pretend that I have all the answers, but to maybe get a conversation going. And then I'll say at the very end that I also have maybe an opportunity that somebody may want to engage in that has to do with sponsoring refugees. Where does the immigration issue stand? Well, it depends really on who you talk to because of the lens with which the issue is seen. But let me try to start off with some hopefully basic facts about the issue. First, if you open the newspaper or turn on the television or your iPhone on any given day about the news, a lot of what is talked about immigration focuses on what's happening at the border. And I think a lot of that is due to what the news thinks is important to Americans and people that are looking at their screens, and perhaps about what many national leaders are talking about, or also local leaders are talking about with immigration. Border is very important, but it's only one aspect of our immigration system. And the fact is that millions of people are coming into the country and also leaving our country every year. And many of them are coming here to work for large or small companies. Could be a school, could be a local business, or it could be something like a big construction company. So that is happening every day. There are families. I bet you everybody in this room has a family member who has petitioned for their spouse or child or relative to the United States. That's very much a part of our immigration system. And of course, there are people who also come here because they are forced into displacement for economic reasons or because of persecution, torture, or something like that. That's what really brings the kind of diversity, different kinds of migrants to our country. And the fact is that the system that we have here in the United States has to be able to manage and process all of those people. What we see on the news is all about literally the physical border, but we also have a whole system under the Department of Homeland Security that processes several million visa applicants every year to come to the United States. And those are critical elements. And when we forget about that, or we don't pay attention to it, what happens is that other aspects of the system don't work as well. And I would posit here today that is a lot of the reason why there's so much concern happening at the border, because other aspects of the entire system aren't working so well. Turning for a moment to the border, why is there so much attention to it? Well, for one, migration globally is at an all-time high. We are looking at about, I think it's 80 million people today who are in what is labeled as forced migration. A large portion of those people are formally designated as refugees. And then an even larger portion of those are considered internally displaced, meaning you might be in Ukraine, not in your house right now. And I think everybody understands what that might mean. Or you might have fled from Ukraine to any other dozens of countries, including the United States. And once you leave your country and are identified as being affected, then you're considered a refugee. 80 million is the current statistics, of the UN, which is the highest point ever in recorded history. A lot of that is due to the continuing instability happening in this world, to climate change, and also to the fact that we are a global country, a global world now, and there are so many different reasons why people want to migrate. That global statistic also is affecting the United States, and we are seeing more people come to the U.S. border. I think just looking back at the past 10 years or 12 years, we've seen a similar increase in people coming to the country, either at ports of entry, or at the border, or through airports, who don't have a visa yet, who are literally walking or running with only the clothes that they could carry on their backs because they left so quickly from the country. Oftentimes that is because they are afraid that somebody's going to do real violence, murder, torture them in the home they lived in, and they just couldn't even leave with documentation to prove why they are of that nationality or why they should be allowed to come to another country. Those are deemed asylum seekers under U.S. law, and if they come here, they can apply for protection under U.S. law to be able to stay here if they get that legal status granted to them. So we're seeing a tremendous spike in people coming to the United States. That's gone on since the Bush administration, Obama administration, Trump administration, and it continues today. One thing to keep in mind is that when you look at pictures on the television, oftentimes it makes it look like the border is not under control. And it's true that in some areas there's very high volume happening, and it's very difficult for our government authorities still to process everybody. The Biden administration has stood up a lot of mechanisms to try to process people more. As a general matter, what I would say is that I think this country can manage it. I think we actually have the capacity to do it. If we think about it from a problem-solving perspective, we have the greatest resources probably of any country to manage this kind of an issue. When you look at what's happening with the Venezuelans that fled from their country just years ago, and that instability continues, their neighbor, Colombia, is hosting 2 million Venezuelans as of right now. Several countries, including Germany, Turkey, Jordan, are hosting several million Syrians from the ongoing war that's been happening there. And those countries are by and large much smaller geographically, population-wise, and also by economic means. So if you think about it in those larger terms, the United States certainly at least should have the capacity if we manage things well. So what does effective management of the border look like? I've left some little 2-page documents on your tables there. I can send the link to people on the Zoom, or David, I'm sure, can make it available if you want to see that. It's just a number of bullet points that my organization, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, have put together to suggest what are some solutions to this issue. Before I jump into that, I'm going to talk about, well, what is our current president doing about it? And is he doing a good job? I would say he gets pretty good reviews, but they're mixed. What is President Biden doing? Well, it's a combination of what I refer to as carrots and sticks to address migration to the United States and to the border. What the carrots include finding more orderly and legal pathways for people to come to the United States. Because why do people arrive in such a rush at the border where there are increasing numbers of people? Well, one of the reasons, and the most significant reason, is that people don't have time to prepare, or they don't have the means or ability to do that. Biden has set up a number of what are referred to as parole programs or sponsorship programs. Parole sounds, I think, to most Americans like, oh wait, is that criminal justice? Has somebody been paroled? In the immigration context, it has nothing to do with that. Parole is a term that comes from statute of humanitarian parole. The idea that we're going to let you in because of humanitarian reasons or some public interest reason that we want you to be able to come here. And he's designated about 6 or 7 different countries, including Venezuela, including Nicaragua, Cuba, Haiti, Ukraine, Afghanistan, to allow a number of people in the 150,000, 200,000 range to come to the United States in a given year. Those mechanisms require people to go through a process to do it. And I'll talk about that process in a little bit if we have time. But the idea is to create more orderly and legal pathways for people to come here so they don't have to arrive without any method of being able to come in here and ask Border Patrol or Customs and Border Protection officers to let them in. Those are some of the positive aspects of what's happening in the orderly process. The other aspect are the sticks, and those are deterrence methods or increased consequences enforcement measures to make sure that people don't come in through irregular means. And that means if you come to the border and try to cross without going through a port of entry, most likely you're going to be expelled. And under Biden's new policies, he's making it more stringent so that you may not be allowed to apply for asylum or humanitarian protection if you come in that way. There's a lot of details to this, but I won't go into details of, except to say this, that our US law does guarantee that if you come to the United States, even if you enter between a port of entry and don't get that approval stamp when you come in, you're still allowed to ask for asylum and still allowed the opportunity to make your case before a judge to ask for asylum. Unfortunately, one of the steps in the sticks end of things that Biden has set up is to very much close that off. And that's something that I am worried about because people are going to be sent back to harm's way. And I've represented children when I was in San Francisco who had come from primarily China and Southeast Asian countries, including Burma, that fled from their countries, literally some of them didn't even know what their hometown was because they're too young when they left and they were fleeing from war. And they ended up on a boat or some were brought over actually as refugees. And if they were just expelled because they didn't come in the right way and fill out the right forms, they would have been sent back and probably would not be alive anymore. So that's what worries me. The fact is that our country needs more solutions to figure out the problem in a way to make the immigration system more orderly, more efficient, and more fair. And to back away from the border, which was one of the central themes I was talking about at the beginning, that immigration is not all about what we see on television about the border, but it's about a broader, comprehensive issue. I'll just highlight that many people and businesses who are waiting for foreign workers to come here for their family are now waiting twice or 3 times as long to get those kinds of visas approved. That has nothing to do with people in flight or people in duress. It's because they want to get a good job opportunity and a company wants them here. But those companies are now complaining because it's taking too long and they can't find workers. And we're at a place right now where the need for foreign workers or any kind of work in the United States is extremely high. Joblessness has gone down and we need those workers here. Those companies and families are complaining that our system doesn't work. And it's true, processing times are far longer for all forms of immigration because the system hasn't been working. So we
need to give Richard to
the time. So I'll make 2 more quick points. I'm sorry to go on here. Topic that I obviously care a lot about. Hope this has been interesting a little bit.
It is.
The last
great.
2 things.
Amazing, but this guy has some important stuff to say too.
So the last 2 things I'll just say is what is on the page in front of you are some solutions that AILA has recommended that really speak to making the US government operate more efficiently and modernizing its system so there aren't delays, because a lot of the concern right now is how do we make processing more efficient? I know what David is going to be talking about is partnering with foreign country governments to make opportunities, economic opportunities to increase stability in other countries so that this global migration phenomenon changes. And the last thing I'll say here is I'll mention 2 organizations to you that are part of a new system, a new plan that the Biden administration has set up called Welcoming and Community Sponsorship. And the idea is that any one of us here, our communities, can sponsor refugees from whatever country, including right now, Ukraine and Afghanistan are top of mind, but many others from Central America. The welcome.us organization, go on the website, welcome.us, or the Community Sponsorship Hub, again, that's Community Sponsorship Hub, are both recent creations in the past 2 years that are nonprofit organizations set up to enable any of us to set up a circle of sponsorship where you can bring in a refugee through your church, through your Rotary Club, and you can just go on the website and get that information. And I commend it to you because it's a way that any of us can help bring refugees into our community and have that contact with a real human being.
Right. Thank you, sir. Rich, come on over here. That's great. Wow. We're just going to go into the slides, and Rich, you can talk while we do my slides. I'm going to let you take over. I don't really have anything to say. Rich is going to talk about a very important program he's been working on for a few years that really ties into this whole conversation. But you already got it better. Got it. Go ahead and bring up the slides. Yeah. And you can just kind of, if just talk and you can just kind of talk while we bring this up. This is what I'm presenting. There's a meeting of Rotary representatives to the international organizations. This is what I'm presenting in Melbourne on Monday. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rich.
Hola, mis amigos. Now, that's the first sentence I used on the first of 3 speeches in San Salvador last week when I represented Rotary President Jennifer Jones at the District 4240 District Conference. Their District 4240 is Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. I started the speech, first speech with 1 sentence of Spanish. The third speech, I had 7 sentences in Spanish. So I made great progress while I was down there. Now, these Rotarians are a very wonderful group of people. And their district is one of 4 districts in a memorandum of understanding with the Organization of American States, which addresses forced displacement. OAS felt it was such a big issue that 5 years ago, OAS, with all the governments in Central America and Mexico, formed something called MIRPS. That was a formalized mechanism for the governments to work together to set up policies and procedures, and they needed a civil society member to help. And they reached out to Rotary to help them to fill the civil society component. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't reach out to the Lions Club. They didn't reach out to the Kiwanis Club. They didn't reach out to the Optimist Club. They reached out to us, the Rotary Clubs. And they said, we want you to create a memorandum of understanding between your Rotary districts in Central America and Washington. And we want you to pick a benchmark project that can train forced displacement returnees to take jobs in the workforce. So we set up the infrastructure between our district here, 7620, District 7610, your Rotary Club. You're only one 43,000 Rotary clubs that's on this MOU. And I bet half of you don't even know about the MOU. So all of those that know about the MOU, just raise your hand. All right, less than half. So we picked a project in Guatemala, and they will have some slides on it where they're very effective, very high effectiveness in training people and putting them back in the workforce. Now, this project has evolved to the point where Spain, who's a permanent observer country, just put in several millions of dollars to be applied to the projects in the Central American country. And Rotary now is setting up an inter-country network of Rotary leaders and Rotary clubs helping these projects, especially in areas of microlending and training, to lend their expertise to the governments. And then as a subset of that, to create more global grants. We have a global grant in process for the training project. They've had global grants before. This one is $170,000, but personal contributors in this district, plus the districts themselves, have put in another $80,000. So there's $250,000 that'll go into the next project, which is a training of young ladies in the area of Guatemala that has the highest forced displacement. These young ladies are forced into marriage and other things. And they're going to be trained in community and economic development so they can go back into their villages and create these small enterprises so people can earn a living and not have to be running up to the borders. And that's it.
So thank you, Rich. So this, we just slide through it. Some of these photos, most of the photos are from one of the top nonprofits in Guatemala. You back it up to the gentleman. There's a photo of a gentleman with a young lady. A lot of the investment, as Rich says, is in female empowerment, jobs. But the basic idea is the more we can create opportunities for people in their home countries, the better off we are. This gentleman that we met with, the gentleman that's up there, Steve, he is leading a nonprofit that's sort of like the benchmark for how we're working. That's in Guatemala. So I think we have time for questions. Who has some questions? Aisha. Here.
Thank you. Actually, the number, according to UNHCR, as of December 2022, is over 100 million forced displaced people, and this is even before what's happening in Sudan. I have a student whose family just became a refugee overnight last few weeks. And, but my question is, and as you said, the 5 countries that host the highest number of refugees are like Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Pakistan, and of the Colombia, and only Westernish country is Germany. So, but there are international organizations, international legal instruments like the Refugee Convention, which I believe U.S. is a party to. So, what are U.S.'s international obligations under these agreements, and what are some of the pathways to make sure that U.S. complies with its international obligations?
Is that the microphone? Can you answer that? Oh, it's probably just turned off. Here we go.
Are we on the air?
Yeah, we're on the air.
So thank you for the question. Thank you for the important correction. I didn't catch your name.
Aisha.
Aisha was saying, sorry, my statistics were a little outdated there. It was 80 million, probably just last year, and I didn't need to check it, that it's 100 million that quickly. But there has been a lot going on in this world. So in answer to your question, so yes, the United States is party, which means that they just signed on, but that's the official term, is they're party to the UN Convention on the Protection of Refugees. And then there's a 1967 document called a Protocol related to refugees, which signed under both. Our US law passed by Congress and then signed by the president, not to be schoolhouse rock here, but we have acceded, meaning we've agreed to the basic principles in something called the 1980 Refugee Act. So that's in federal code. The basic principles that govern what needs to happen when somebody actually comes here on their own is something I was saying before, that if you come here to the United States, you have the right to be able to apply for protection and to get that opportunity. And the issue that I think we got to think about right now is, as the Biden administration is implementing new policies, do the new policies that are meant to speed things up and to expedite the process, do they truncate the process so much that you don't really have that chance to do it? I'll give you a specific example. There's an interview that happens very quickly now under the new procedures that Biden just implemented in early May. That means that you should be interviewed for whether or not you are entitled to asylum within 24 hours of arrival. The challenge for that is that if I arrive in a new place and I don't have all my papers together, or I've got a family and I literally walk to get here, you may not even be in a state of mind to be able to talk about your life circumstances while you're here, let alone have the documentation to prove why you might be entitled to asylum. And you probably also can't get a lawyer to do it. And statistically, lawyers are one of the most important factors to make sure the system's fair. So that's one of the criticisms we have of the current system. But the other aspect that I think you're alluding to was the fact that many, many countries that are smaller are actually hosting more refugees and are pledged to host more refugees in the United States. Historically, over the past 20 years, the United States has brought in about 80,000 refugees every year. It's been more or less during different administrations and different global crises. But we can always do more. There isn't any requirement that the United States has to do anything under the UN law or US law, the number of refugees we resettle. Biden has said he wants to do 120,000. That's a pledge. There's no requirement that he do it. And then it's global accountability, right? Country leaders looking at each other. Well, what are you doing? What are we doing? And we want to be a global humanitarian leader. So that's where the pressure comes from on that.
All right, I think we have time for Eric, one more question. No? Okay, good. So why don't we give these guys an amazing hand. Wow, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Greg. That was amazing.
Sorry, I was going around to